it's great for the continent of Africa to come together for the first time in an African Climate Summit. In the 33 years of international climate negotiations, Africans have been guests in international summits. Never have we had the summit that we've had in Nairobi. But when you look at the summit outcomes, I must say the summit declaration is weak and inadequate. We're in a world where the climate is changing, and the continent of Africa, which is home to 17% of the global population, who have emitted the least. Between our 17% of the global population, we're only responsible for less than 4% of the emissions. But when you look at it from an historic perspective, from when we started emitting carbon dioxide, the total emissions of Africa is just 0.5% of the total global emissions. What we wanted out of Nairobi is for Africa to chart the right path between the two wrong paths. On one hand, you have Africa's polluters who wants to follow in the footsteps of the historic polluters who've caused climate change in the first place. These folks want to follow in their footsteps and be able to dig more fossil fuels. On the other hand, you have the historic polluters, the Western countries, countries that are home to about 20% of the global population, but account for nearly 3/4 of the historic emissions. Rather than cutting emissions at the source, these countries want to actually have Africa cut their emissions as they continue to pollute in the name of buying what I will call pollution permits, but has been sold to the continent of Africa in this summit as carbon credits. So this was an opportunity for us to chart a just transition for Africa. Renew Africa's strategic vision so that we can be able to tackle the intersecting crises of climate, energy crisis, the development crisis, the debt crisis, the hunger that continues to stalk the continent of Africa. If you ask me, this continent faces 3 strategic deficiencies. The first one is we have food deficit. We don't have food sovereignty. 85% of the food we eat in this continent is imported. We also have an energy deficit. 600 million Africans do not have access to electricity. 970 million Africans still don't have clean cooking. So there was an opportunity for us to actually prioritize how we deliver sustainable energy access for this continent, but do it in a way that is climate compatible. The third thing is the low value-added content of our export relative to our imports. We don't have a pan-African green industrialization. And if you look at our world with the change in geopolitics, there is a contestation between the big global powers. And they see our continent as a source of cheap raw materials and as a market for their finished products. And they want to effectively control how Africa makes its climate and energy policy. And so the opportunity this continent had in Nairobi was for us to actually set a strategic vision where we take control of our own destiny, where Africans chart for the first time a climate vision that is also going to help us be able to develop in a clean way.
Okay.
And I must say, we fell short.
If I heard you right, Dr. Adow, it seems to me that you think the continent should have looked more inward than outward in this summit, because we've had very strong voices coming out of the KICC, especially directed